Is it your first webcam microphone up close? Webcam microphone up close?
At the age of 19 in 1962, she was a...
But I have the files. I read this stuff at the National Archives, and I read these other things. I said to myself, how can that be possible? The brain, pistols and frontal slab of choice, and on computers, doesn't really matter. Internet, professional wrestlers, and not Jesse Ventura style. It doesn't matter where the information comes from as long as it's real. It's hard to get real information. Because seriously, they don't want you to have agrees to sources whenever I try to prove out. It's not. If you expect your government to tell you the truth, you're going to be sadly disappointed. Another one of these things.
Dear Lord, what a dirty, dirty old man, huh?
Really? Can't be serious. Is this really how you want things to be? Come on. More hooker, eruptions? Eruptions, whatever.
Like Dave Powers kind of...
Really?
Allegedly broadcast live from Pima Region 2. Within the borders of the formerly united and currently occupied states of America, we bring you the Ochelli Effect.
I damn sure know I'm an original. We have all these situations. I'd love to know why it takes 50 years, for
that.
For a 19-year-old girl to eventually get up to gumption to put these things out.
And that is that on the 24th day of January 2015. This is the Ochelli Effect, as the wonderful, obnoxious bumper states, and we are live on UCY.TV radio. So, tonight we're going to discuss some interesting things that are going on in the Middle East. We're going to discuss Hollywood movies. We're going to discuss the Pegasus files. We may even discuss some other interesting things in the intelligence information age, as it were. It is what it is, ladies and gentlemen. But the guy that I'm going to bring back on for another visit, and I didn't advertise him because last time that I did advertise that this gentleman was going to appear with me, we had all sorts of communication issues. In fact, the last two times that I attempted to bring him to the show, we had all sorts of communication issues that could not be explained. I could not bring him on. So tonight we will bring back Frank Gregory Ford, who is the guy that saw all of those interesting things in Iraq while he was an intelligence agent over there. He was the only American intelligence agent to ever be renditioned out of a foreign country and survive. Okay, and currently has a lawsuit pending against the United States government for what he went through, because technically speaking, he was actually tortured, kidnapped, and renditioned, as they say, against his will. All of that wonderful stuff for trying to report to his superiors that there was various illegal, immoral activity going on in the theater of operation regarding intelligence collection, torture, as it were, in Iraq, in Syria, in various other areas. Of course, at one point he actually ran across the guy that we now know to be the alleged leader of the ISIL movement. Right, this guy, interesting, like I said, very interesting, with a very long history and very in-depth look from a personal perspective. The guy doesn't know everything about everything, but I do want his take on the recent game being played regarding Middle Eastern terrorism, not only with the French situation, but now, of course, in the past 24 to 36 hours, we're also confronted with the Japanese journalist, the alleged beheading, again, of another alleged captor of the alleged ISIL. Wow, how many times can I use the word alleged in a sentence? But anyway, let's see where we can go. Also, by the way, I was having a brief discussion with Mr. Ford off the air, and he does actually get into some things that are more current in the mainstream. For instance, the American Sniper movie, which I have very mixed feelings about, especially regarding this character, Chris Kyle. Who was allegedly again murdered by a fellow veteran, and was also a prolific sniper. And this gets into a whole sort of dark area regarding the way that warfare is conducted and all of that kind of thing. You know what? I did forget to thank everybody for tuning in, either at ucy.tv/TOE, which is the main site and has an automatic player there. You can go there. There's a chat room. Probably later in my program, we will take some phone calls. But we also have a couple of people scheduled to call in during the show, so I don't know if we'll actually get to the public's questions. I do have some questions that were gathered up from the last two times that Mr. Ford was on, and so I'm going to ask him those as soon as he joins me, and he should be here just about any second. I'm just waiting on my Skype to ring, and I will add him into the call. Anyhow, so I do want to thank everybody for tuning in, whether you're using your TuneIn app, you're listening on iTunes, Internet Radio, Shoutcast, whatever it is that you're utilizing. Apparently there's a couple of other places that the stream can be picked up as well. And, hey, if you're catching this further downstream, I do advise you to go to ucy.tv and check out a whole lot of interesting programming there. There is a wide array of individuals that happen to include me 3 days a week, because the Ochelli Effect does broadcast on Tuesdays and Thursdays, 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and, of course, Saturday night, which you are joining me on now, 8 to 10. Those are the live shows, but the archives are available, and now there's even a little link to the YouTube playlist at the ucy.tv/TOE page. But do check out all of the other wonderful people that are simulcast and do originate with UCY, whether they are pre-recorded or live like myself. Generally speaking, I've done live shows with the exception of 3 nights since I started this nearly a year ago. Anyhow, I do think things have gotten a whole lot more diverse since I began. I started with the JFK topic and all that, but since then we've gotten into a whole lot of interesting geopolitical discussions, various guests, different things have gone on in the show, and I want to say that anybody who has been with me for a while now, thank you very much for listening. Okay, so... And you know what? Just as I always... Oh, one more thing, because recently I was in discussions with somebody about funding certain projects of mine. I don't ask for any donations on my show, but if you do go to the ucy.tv page, there is a place where you can utilize that little donation button, and all of that would be appreciated. And hey, the only thing that I would ask if you're listening to me separately is to go on and let them know that you're donating because you listen to this show. That would be nice, because I'd like Jules to see that every once in a while. That would be good. And besides, you tip a pizza man, don't you? So a couple of dollars or a couple of pennies or whatever it is you can spare into that donation cup is something that I think is definitely required if you do enjoy all the programming on here. So, Mr. Ford, are you with me?
Yes, I am, Chuck.
Amazing. We don't have the electronic interference tonight, sir. It seems as though I have you clearly at the moment. Maybe I shouldn't curse myself and speak too soon. But we had all kinds of misadventures trying to get in contact with each other recently that I can't explain in a normal way. So,
well, I can, but I'm sure your listeners know exactly what's responsible and who's responsible, for interference on your show when I talk. So it's not uncommon. Other shows I've spoken on, same thing happens. And so anyway, here I am, and so let's talk as fast as we can for your listeners to make sure we get it all out before the intrusion starts, the jamming starts, the intercept starts, and the meekening starts. So they call it meeking in the trades. So anyway, yeah, go ahead. What what is happening with your newscast tonight and your listeners.
Okay, well, let's start out here. Now, the court case, which I did reference in the intro and did discuss, is kind of not seeming to move forward at the moment. Partially because we have sort of a regime change going on in the District of Semiramis, but also because this is part of the natural process. But I wonder if you wanted to kind of let everybody know how that's going, because as I stated at the top of the show, you're the only American intelligence officer to ever be renditioned and survive, and in a very literal sense, you were actually kidnapped and tortured directly. In fact, in German airspace, which essentially means that, on a sovereign nation's soil without their permission or their knowledge. And we did cover that kind of extensively, but I wonder if you want to kind of give everybody who might have not caught those first few shows just sort of a taste of what that's about. Because, as I said, you're also the only person that I've ever heard of bringing this kind of case against the United States government as well.
Well, sure, okay. Well, that was a mouthful, but and just so your listeners understand, I didn't ask for any of that headache. I mean, my letters of retirement were in. I had spent 30 years, being in the intelligence services. I never expected, to receive what I got, okay, from our government, all right, to show you just how far we were in the hands of madmen, okay, during the Bush administration. And I say madmen, that's just scratching the surface of who was in control of this country. And I'll emphasize that because I was contacted this week with a possibility of potentially opening the Nuremberg hearings on the war crimes of Dick Cheney. He's my first number one target right there, Dick Cheney, George W. Bush, and Donald Rumsfeld. Now, I know everybody thinks of them as the Three Musketeers, but I'll tell you what, when I was being strapped to a stretcher and I was having drugs injected into my system, I knew what was going to happen. And still, it took me probably 3 years to recover a little bit after because the sodium amytal series that I was injected with were outlawed years and years ago, because they destroy your brain. There's no question. They destroy the brain when they're injected into the human body. And that was what was happening was these drugs were designed to interrogate and torture, basically, Soviet defectors to make sure that they were defectors. So anyway, I was, to make a long story short, I was asked to consider the possibility of actually making the opening sequence speech to the Nuremberg war crimes tribunals. Now, 5 years ago, an attorney by the name of what was his name? Scott Horton. Okay, he's the world's leading expert on human rights abuses, and he opened the Nuremberg hearings with my case, the reference to my case directly, and he said, under no circumstances is this any way to fight a war. All right, of course, Iraq was still going on and so forth, and Scott Horton was the attorney who went to Abu Ghraib prison, which I have basically filed my court case about, and my renditioning, and he informed our government that they were not only were they courting disaster, they were in a disastrous situation. Historically, judicially, executively, in every which way, they were in a bad place to be. Americans don't go in for third world torture tactics, all right? We are not a police state, at least not yet. Now, if the Bushes had had their way, yes, we would be in a police state now. We're close. We're very close, but fortunately, we have something called a political time constraint on how long you can serve in office. If that wasn't the case, if that safeguard wasn't in place, you can bet that we would have had another 9/11, just about at the end of George Bush's second term. So anyway, but my case isn't actually dragging its feet. It might seem like it, but my case is what's called a case of first impressions. Is at no time in history has a legal precedent been set where a U.S. citizen was actively kidnapped and tortured, all right, and then flown out without any orders, any authorization, out of a war zone. That's called renditioning, all right? It's a very, very bad word to use now in legal circles. Renditioning, okay? And of course I was flown out and flown through German airspace against my will, being tortured in German airspace, and now the Germans are very upset. So with that in mind, the judicial system, of course, with the opposition that I'm facing, which is the U.S. Attorney's Office. Now, I'm sure your listeners would love to hear, my justification of why the U.S. Attorney's Office should exist, but I don't really have one. I can't figure out why they exist other than to let the government break its own laws whenever it feels like and not being held accountable.
Well,
That's all I can tell.
And let's just make something very clear. The whole reason why, the whole justification, the alleged justification for doing what was done to you was essentially because you were doing your job and going back because, okay, let's just dial it back a little bit. You were effectively a medic, okay? Not necessarily a fully qualified doctor at the time, but you were somebody who had medical training, you were somebody who had military training, you had intelligence training, and you were there and fully aware of the conditions of individuals who had gone through what they called enhanced interrogation, right? And we're essentially letting your superiors know that what is going on here is not correct. This is out of control and getting more out of control. And of course, this led to the Abu Ghraib scandal, as you mentioned, and a whole lot more. And even over time now, we've even gotten admissions from the Central Intelligence Agency, which you were not a CIA guy per se, but you were a military intelligence guy. Nonetheless, I mean, this stuff kind of all swam together at that time during the Iraqi occupation and during the invasion and everything else. This is what was going on. But the deal is that really the reason why they needed to get rid of you is because you were standing up and telling them that what was going on was not what should be happening, right?
Metaphors and euphemisms aside, interrogating somebody on the premise of organ failure is no way to do things, okay? That is no way to gather intelligence. Organ failure, and it was the U.S. Attorney's Office who authorized organ failure as a legitimate guideline to interrogate somebody with. So these are the same people that are now doing everything they can, pulling out all the stops to make sure that my case doesn't go anywhere. All right, which I guess that's normal for lawyers. Okay, to be absolutely amoral, unethical, and they call this doing their job actually, but and in this case where the image of America has been damaged forever. Okay, the worst case of war crimes in U.S. history have now transpired. And here is the U.S. Attorney's Office doing everything it can to make sure that these war crimes are repeated, that it's okay to do these bad things. And to show you how ridiculous they can be, I sat in a courtroom not too long ago while Shukai Kim, who was with the U.S. Attorney's Office, looked the judge right in the eye, and said, yes, we do not contest anything that Dr. Ford has put forth in this case. We can't contest any of the documentation that he's produced. By the way, that's 500 pounds of documentation. Okay, close to 7,000 documents I've produced. We can't contest any of that. Okay, yes, we did rendition him. We did torture him. But the thing is, it's okay. It's all right to do that. And the judge looked even startled, and with a straight face, the U.S. Attorney's Office said, because we didn't do it on U.S. soil, okay? It's okay to torture somebody, but, especially your own people, but not on U.S. soil. I guess they don't include a U.S. air base, a U.S. aircraft, and a U.S. air base in Germany, their own soil, U.S. soil. But that's the kind of mindset that we have here, and that's what kind of mindset has produced the worst crimes, and it's continuing. The fallout is continuing, Chuck. And your listeners, I think, understand this.
Well, you know what else makes no sense, though, Mr. Ford, is that, listen, and I think I brought this up with you before, but I think it bears repeating. The fact is that based on the way American jurisprudence goes here, okay, regarding these types of things, even if you are an American citizen and you leave the country with the explicit intent to commit a crime, and you commit a crime on foreign soil, you can still be prosecuted in a U.S. court for doing so, right? So
that's correct.
So here's the thing. Even if they say, listen, it wasn't on U.S. soil, so therefore, you're not operating under the constraints of U.S. law, based on the statutory extent by which, citizenship is handled, if these were American citizens who left the country with the explicit intent to commit criminal acts, and one of those criminal acts ends up being the treatment, that you received, which is against all sorts of international laws and United States laws. I mean, I'm pretty sure that this stuff is technically against the Uniform Code of Military Justice, even regarding treatment of your fellow servicemen, right? So there's all sorts of avenues for prosecution. There's all sorts of avenues for laying the blame upon others here, and showing that there was damages, there was criminal intent, there was activity here, which is absolutely illegal based on international law and United States law. It seems as though there would be no question as to what the situation is if you can corroborate it. Now, your corroboration, even though they played games with you regarding your documentation personally, right? You still with me?
Oh, yes. Well,
okay.
Disappeared 30 years of my life is what they did.
Well, that's always the first move. And I told you this before about other cases that I had studied and looked into, is that in a lot of cases they disappeared military records or misplaced them, in one way or another, so that you don't have access to a lot of the very basic corroboration. But even in spite of that, you actually were able to come up with a whole lot of the documentation that they seem to disappear, and you've entered that into the record, right?
That's correct.
So it almost begs the question,
including Operation Copper Green, which the government's busy scrambling around trying to deny, and Operation Q-Bark, which should, by itself, when it's exposed in a courtroom, in the air of a courtroom, should put Dick Cheney, if the system is working even in the most minuscule way, all right, Dick Cheney should be spending the rest of his life in Leavenworth making license plates. Mm-hmm. All right, so, if it's working at all, okay. Operation Q-Bark, okay, and that is part of my documentation. All right, the War Crimes Tribunal concerning El Salvador and the death squads in El Salvador were all formulated, and the torture chambers that were licensed and set up basically by Dick Cheney to operate under the guise of, and I just love saying this name, by the way, the Bush administration prides itself, especially George H.W. Bush, Poppy Bush, who everybody is concerned about, I guess, right now, that he's supposed to be passing away. But the part I like is that George H.W. Bush said, yes, we were going to be a kinder, gentler nation. But behind the scenes, here is the infamous, psychopathic Dick Cheney right? Because he came from a robber baron family, he's always been in a position of power. He was able to do these horrendous, hideous things that happened in Operation Q Bark, and the International Tribunal in The Hague, okay, that actually controls war crimes and so forth, and examines and investigates war crimes like the Balkans and Central America, said anybody connected with Operation Q Bark is going to prison. They are a war criminal. They will be going to prison. Okay? Operation Q Bark, the author and sole architect of Operation Q Bark is Dick Cheney. All right? These are just some of the issues that I'm going to speak about in my oral arguments, all right, concerning my case, if those are allowed to happen. So you know, and also, on top of that, something that nobody has spoken about is, you know, these kinder, gentler leaders that we had running this country for 8 years. I mean, my God, it'll be 30 years before we can even begin to undo the damage that was done. But Nigeria is in the news right now. You can pick up any newspaper and see Nigeria is in trouble. All right. Well, we had death squads operating in Nigeria, in the Delta, the Niger River, operating there. Guess who was responsible for setting those up? Okay, and guess who is reacting to the actions of those death squads and torture chambers? It's Dick Cheney again. What is it with this guy? Do any of your listeners know what is it with Dick Cheney? I mean, he's operated, acted like a robber baron thief. I mean, he ripped off the people of Wyoming on oil transportation taxes for how long? 25 years, 30 years, and then he goes to Washington and proceeds to set up the most disastrous types of foreign policy imaginable. Okay, imaginable, and here we are. Here the guy is still operating. In fact, yesterday I was notified that Dick Cheney now has been given rights, mining rights, in Israel. He can go to Israel and mine. Okay.
This is new, and of course, this guy is traceable all the way back to the Ford administration regarding his involvement with policy and the White House and various government agencies. He's had his fingers in a lot of things, and not the least of which is Halliburton. Hello, if you go back to Brown and Root Construction, you can see where the genesis of Halliburton actually is. And here we go. All of the integrated, wonderful, cancer that seems to keep, coming back out of remission and, inflicting itself on the American body politic. This is exactly what Dick Cheney is. And, somebody said to me one night, the turd that doesn't flush. But I wish he was a turd. He'd be a lot less harmful, So you know what? This kind of leads to one of the questions, because I actually got a list of questions from listeners that were dropped on me after they picked it up downstream, and they didn't want to call in, but they sent these things via text or email or whatever. And I wonder if you want to go over a couple of those, because Q-Bark comes up in one of those.
You bet. I'd love to answer some questions.
Okay, and I don't give full names of people that ask questions via text, because unless you're calling in and identifying yourself and speaking for yourself, I don't necessarily trust that you're not misdirecting me to identify somebody else is asking a question. So a first name and maybe a location is the best I'm going to give you when you send me text messages, guys. So here we go. Let's see now. The first one. Okay, the first one actually is from a guy named Stan. This is where the Q-Bark question comes in, because I had to make notes about this. Right, Stan, who says he's from New Mexico. Okay. So Stan in New Mexico asked about, were you aware that there were children being tortured, during the time that you were in Iraq?
Yes, Stan from New Mexico. Yes, I actually had to provide the medical care because my group was busy torturing children. I consider anybody under the age of 16 to be a child. All right. And yes, we were torturing children. And in one morning, I had 4 children suffer cardiac arrest from our kinder, gentler interrogation processes. All right. So yes, I'm very aware of it, and you can go back in my reports that will appear in court, hopefully. I went back and I was actually able to provide the SF-93s, the SF-88s, and the SF-600s. Those are the standard forms for medical treatment for who I had to treat and the conditions that they had and what I had to do for them. And yes, I was able to save most of those medical records of very young people. And like I said, in one morning, I had 4 cardiac arrests that I had to deal with. I was able to save all of those. But those were the direct result of my team torturing young people.
Yeah, but see, you weren't the one. Yeah, no, not at all. I was going to make that clear. And you weren't the one, directly conducting the interrogations. You're actually the guy who's patching these people up after, after
Right.
the organ failures and other things occur.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. Let's just make that clear.
I was the doc, right? And I always knew. I kept. We had such traumatic, results from our interrogation that when you're a doctor, you have an obligation to protect people. When people are in your custody in wartime, as the Geneva Convention very clearly states, yes, no, you are supposed to protect people that are in your control. You're not supposed to torture them. You're not supposed to humiliate them. You're not supposed to stick burning cigarettes in their ears. You're not supposed to garrote them. You're not supposed to set them on fire. You're not supposed to throw them off a bridge. And you can go back in my medical records, and you'll see that's exactly what my intelligence team was doing. All right, to showcase, for instance, the incident at the bridge at Samara. All right, where young kids, these were all younger than 15, were interrogated on the bridge itself and then thrown off, and they died in the river, in the Tigris River. All right. So yes, Stan, I don't mean to be dramatic, hyper dramatic about it, but yes, and that's one of the major reasons why, Stan, you asking that question is why I filed charges to try to stop that torture while it was going on, and you can see how I was treated. So yes, I think that answers Stan's question.
Oh, absolutely. Also, in the same message, he had mentioned and seized upon the term Q-bark because we've seen this in other documentation, much older documentation, and I'm going to kind of condense what he had to say about it and tell you that, this was generally, at one point, it was used as a code word to identify the CIA in certain documents. Now, that's a misrepresentation. What it does usually indicate in general documents in the 1960s and the 50s is an intelligence asset or group of assets that are in a particular place. Now, as for why it's a similar name for this operation, I don't know. I'm not the guy who dreams these things up. But this is the same word, but it's a totally different situation from those old documents that we saw regarding, Q-bark and the different anachronisms that were out there. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. What, about Q-bark?
Q-bark is an acronym. And of course it all relates to counterinsurgency programs. All right. COIN, okay, and that's another overused, but time-honored acronym. COIN, counterinsurgency. It started back in the early '60s, and Q-bark is a spin-off. Okay, that Q-bark is an evolution program that resulted from the old, and I'm dating myself here, the old Phoenix program that was being run by the Military Airlift Command and Special Operations Group in Vietnam. Okay, they call them the MAX-SOG program of Phoenix. All right, so Phoenix was, and everybody refers to it as an infamous program, notorious and infamous because it was basically the first predecessor towards of Copper Green. Well, we have Copper Green now. Phoenix program sent many Vietnamese to a horrible death. Okay, so being tortured, being dismembered. Any way that one human being can give unbelievable, hideous treatment to another human being, it happened in Max Sog Phoenix program.
Right,
Now,
and you also find this replete in documents regarding the actions in Cuba during the time of the sabotage, the attempts to put together programs to assassinate Fidel Castro. QBARC is also used during that time as exactly the same thing, like you're talking about, the counterinsurgency, as it were, because they viewed the Castro government as a revolutionary insurgency, and they sought to counter the implementation of that government and the involvement and all that stuff. And if you go back and you look through some of the original CIA documents and you read them for yourself, you'll find QBARC being mentioned in there as well.
Yes, to emphasize and extrapolate from that is, of course, we became a kinder, gentler nation. Okay, when George H.W. Bush took over. And basically, we were lucky to have survived, with any civil rights in the U.S. after George H.W. Bush became president. But and I got that from the FBI, by the way, directly from the FBI. They said that it was just incredible that we did have Bill Clinton take over. Not that was any great thing, but if we'd had another 4 years of George H.W. Bush, we would have had the same disaster that we had with the village idiot son of his. All right, so
it did give us a break where Cheney goes into the private sector briefly, though. So I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing.
QBARC, now here's the thing about Cheney. You gotta watch him. Okay, boy, he is one clever, sinister guy. Okay, I mean, never a dull moment. Boy, I don't know if it's the pacemaker thing. The fake heart, all that kind of stuff. But clearly he is a criminal sociopath and an architect extraordinaire. Now, when he was Secretary of Defense, SecDef, for George H.W. Bush, he spent a lot of time, I can almost guarantee that about 100% of people don't know this, that he would disappear for weeks on end, and he would go to these little in-the-country kind of, symposiums, for lack of a better description, where new programs were designed. Say, all of a sudden, terrorists were to attack America, and they were to do something like fly planes into a building, say in New York City, and crash those planes, or attack certain targets around the Washington D.C. area, and attack, and basically it was terrorists that did it. So how would America react, and what kind of responses could the government pull off with the American people, like take all their rights and remove any protections, protecting the American people from its own government? How much and what could they do? At that time, all right, and what could they expect? And hence, Cheney went in these symposiums with all the reviews of these think tanks, the American Heritage Foundation, the RAND Corporation. It goes on and on.
Right, and this is where people often reference the People for the New American Century, the PNAC documents, talking about the need for a new Pearl Harbor and all that. And all this stuff is real. This goes on all the time regarding a strategy about how to sort of deal with the experiment that is the United States of America. Because we are still a unique nation, despite the fact that our rights have been greatly eroded over recent times here, under the guise of protecting us from the awful terrorists across the ocean. Of course, we're going to get more into that in a moment. I want to get to a couple more of these questions because I got a short list, okay?
Great.
Let's see. Now, this one is, let's see, who is this from? She calls herself Sherry, and I think she's from New York. She basically asks, didn't the CIA was in the same facilities as the military people, or at least she's asking that question. Wasn't the CIA in the same facilities as the military people? And doesn't this have a lot to do with what came out, regarding the CIA's torture methods? The same stuff that you were seeing is the same stuff the CIA was participating in. This is what she's basically throwing out there as a question. So I guess she wants to know if the CIA, proper was in the same facilities as you were.
You've got some sharp people on your show that call in. I'm impressed. I'm always impressed, Chuck. All right, yes, Sherry in New York. Have you ever heard the term incestuous? All right, that's what kind of relationship military intelligence has with the CIA. Okay, Central Intelligence Agency. We were all ensconced, kind of like the Waltons, Walton's Mountain, if you remember that show. Just one big happy family in Building 1A there at Abu Ghraib. And it was my command who was in charge of counterintelligence operations, which of course I am. When you see behind my name CIA, that doesn't stand for the Culinary Institute of America or the Cocaine Importation Agency. That stands for a counterintelligence agent. That's me. All right. There was some concern about that in the courtroom when CIA was seen after my name. So that's what it stands for. But yes, now my group was from military intelligence. Okay, which I was a counterintelligence operative. What we did was we actually had interrogation duties, and virtually all interrogators were assigned to my unit, the 205th, the infamous 205th Military Intelligence Unit in Building 1A, Abu Ghraib. And what we did was, we every day we strategized what was going on, who was coming in, and whether we wanted to actually transfer ownership of certain assets, certain detainees, certain POWs. That's what happened. And then the agency, of course, was operating there, doing its own bit of what's the word, nefarious behavior. But the thing is that we've also had other intelligence agencies there too, as I've mentioned on the show before. General Janis Karpinski, who was the general in charge of Abu Ghraib, that was her facility, and she was stunned when she had to find out, when she ran into him face to face, were Israeli intelligence operatives. Israel, had people there. So, sorry, all bets were off about talking about this stuff. When they strapped me to a stretcher forcibly and renditioned me, shot me full of drugs, guess what? They gave up all the rights to keep all this stuff secret. So, Sherry in New York, that's what kind of relationship we had, is an incestuous one with the agency, and in virtually the same room. And they asked us to do a lot of the heavy lifting for them, such as interrogations, and all the interrogation camps were run through my command, which was the 205th Military Intelligence Unit, commanded by the infamous, and anybody can look this up right now, Thomas Pappas, Pappas. And if you want to see what kind of relationship he had, even after he was brought up on charges over Abu Ghraib, the disaster, he was given a job where presently he is now, besides being one of the defendants in my court case in San Francisco, he is actually training intelligence people still in Langley, Langley, Virginia, all right? So, that's how traumatized our government was by all these revelations of torture,
Well,
he
I'll
just
tell
gave
you.
all these guys great jobs.
Oh, exactly. Well, this is what they do. They reward people for the jobs that they were supposed to do. You know, this whole shock and awe over the fact that we were involved in this is ridiculous, because it was perfectly known among that community, as it were. Although you know, General Karpinski had no knowledge of this stuff, and if she had knowledge of it, she would have tried to put a stop to it. That's for certain. But that's the thing, is that actually, if your reports would have made it where they were supposed to go, she would have gotten wind of this, and we might have a whole other ball game here. But it actually leads into the next question when you're talking about using, talking about transferring ownership, as it were, of assets. Because one of the most interesting assets that you ran across during that time is somebody who comes up in more current conversations. So, so this one is this is the last one. Actually, it's two questions, and it was. Now I kind of had to edit this down, but Bill in Florida wanted to know about if he heard correctly when you said that the same guy that they now identify as the head of ISIS, the main guy who is the head of ISIL, ISIS, IS, the Islamic State, whatever it is you want to call it, was this actually the same guy that you at one point had as an asset while you were on the ground there doing your counterintelligence work? Was this the same guy? And if that's the case, you know, essentially, doesn't it seem likely that the CIA did wind up with control of this guy and might still control him to this day, is what he's asking. But first, let's clarify if that's exactly who we're talking about, and then we'll go into you know, what happened to him after you were removed from the scene.
Okay, now Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. You know, I knew that I wouldn't get to see the end of this guy when I left Iraq. But yes, I met him my second night on assignment in Samarra, the city of Samarra, okay, Iraq. And he was brought in, you know, because everything was up in the air. There was chaos everywhere. And some of our police, Iraqi police, had grabbed him and brought him in. And they had picked up they actually brought him Abu Bakr and two of his associates from a group called Mukhabarat. All right, I'd like your listener. I hope Bill is listening so he can look that name up, because that will open up quite a kettle of fish. Okay, in terms of what ISIS means, yeah, and what this whole program means. But the Mukhabarat was Hussein's intelligence network, which was probably the most effective intelligence group besides the Mossad, Israeli Mossad, in the Middle East. And so we had this fellow, this smug-looking little joker by the name of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, okay? Everybody got it kicked out of his last name because it sounds like Baghdad, actually, just to add an I on the end. And so, but he was being pretty smug about an issue. And I don't know if I mentioned it last time, but he was, the first thing out of his mouth was, "We know where your female soldier is, and we know what's going on with her, and we are doing things to her." And
of course, what we're talking about here is a name everybody knows now, regardless of what you think actually occurred during the rescue operation and all of that. We're talking about somebody whose name we know, right?
Absolutely, Jessica Lynch.
Mm-hmm.
Jessica Lynch. And now, you know, there was a panic. There was an air of panic with everybody. First of all, we couldn't figure out how that disaster happened. How did they take a wrong turn? And it turns out the Marines actually misdirected the convoy, and it went off into another town that was held, you know, not by us, but by the bad guys. And the rest is pretty much history. But this vicious little twerp looked me right in the eye and with a smirk told me all the things that they were doing to her. And it actually one of the few times that I've actually almost blown a fuse. Okay, and so I just looked him right back in the square in the eye and said, "Okay, fine, we have you. And when I find out what was done to her, we are going to do exactly the same thing to you, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi." And I have to admit you're not supposed to try to intimidate people that are in your custody or under your control. But it was rather satisfying to watch the blood drain out of his face instantly. And then we were on a fairly even footing, and he immediately had told me exactly where to find her, where she was. As it was, it took 3 more days just to get everybody organized to go get her. But that's the information, the first bit of information I received from Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. And then it took a while to figure out why was this nasty little joker, okay, so important. Everybody seemed to be terrified of him. Besides, clearly, he looked like he had penchants for sadism and social pathology. I wanted to find out, which seems to be a requirement for working in the Mukhabarat, but why everybody was so terrified of him. And turns out he was in command. He was the commander of Mukhabarat, Samarra, Iraq. And so I had a source who was very distinguished, very well educated, and he had walked in like the day I got there. He walked in, and to the day I left, or strapped to a stretcher, should we say, this one source said, absolutely, positively recruit him. Do whatever you have to do to recruit this man. All right, control him. Do not let him get out of control, because he is going to amount to something someday. And then I was informed of the massive database system that Abu Bakr Baghdadi had control of, which was Mukhabarat system, which is absolutely critical right now with ISIS. ISIS doesn't make mistakes, and guess why they don't make mistakes? It's because they have access to that database system. Now, after I was strapped to a stretcher and tortured for filing war crimes charges and refusing to back off on those charges, by the way, that was another issue. The way I understand it was my sources. Okay, one source was actually killed. He was hung on a meat hook for several days and tortured. And the other source went on to become the first president of Kurdistan. And then there was Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, all right? And he was placed in Camp Bucca, B-U-C-C-A,
Right.
and where he was brutalized, okay? And so if he didn't have a bad opinion of Americans before he went to Camp Bucca, he just dealt with me, okay, at Samarra. He was then transferred. After he was brutalized in Bucca, he was then transferred to a infamous place called Abu Ghraib prison. All right. Now, when Abu Bakr left Abu Ghraib, the way I understand it, of course I was long gone at that point, but is that he turned to his control officer and said, I'm going to return. I'm going to give you, Americans specifically, exactly what you just gave me in Bucca and Abu Ghraib. So he turned right around. He had the money, he had the knowledge, he had the database system, he had the personnel, and he went to a place that was already in chaos, and he organized a group of fanatics. That's what I say. I could control the world if I had a division of fanatics like ISIS. Okay, I could probably run the world, rule it, okay, conquer it. But he went, when he went back into Iraq, the first thing he did was he targeted Abu Ghraib prison, and he developed his core, his entire core of ISIS is the 5,000 fighters that were locked up, that had been brutalized in Abu Ghraib prison, and now he's unstoppable. There's some mumbo jumbo in the news about how we've kind of arrested the development of ISIS in Iraq. Yeah, right. And I have some land in I have a bridge in Brooklyn I want to sell you. Okay,
Well, right,
fully.
and the thing about this is that the guy was not exactly. You see, they're trying to trace now to say that this was the place where his hatred of the West was born and all that. But it seems to me as though all it did is add to what was already part of his arsenal of emotional bias against the West, as it were. It just fed into the the place he was coming from to begin with, and now we're facing this whole thing. But it's weird because at one point it seems as though we could have had absolute control of them. And I contend that there were probably people that want the agitation, that want the balkanization, that want the continued unrest over there, that are actually feeding them the money, the supplies, and everything else that they need. They have their intelligence network in place, and they have a ready, willing, and able portion of the population wanting to join them. But in recent times here, we're faced with the idea that there's a whole lot of Westerners that are going there, and wanting to join up with the cause, as it were. And let me just ask the last thing from Bill's question, and then I want to get into more recent events and see how we tie these things back to what's going on during the time that you were on the scene, as it were, during the time that you were directly involved. But
did I answer Bill's question? Because it was kind of a nebulous question there. I think there were like two questions. I want to make sure I answer all these questions in a sound fashion here.
Right, and the last part of it was something that I brought up to you before we went on the air, in full disclosure here, because I thought that this was one of the most valid things that was asked of me, which was, almost why is it that they haven't sort of just paid you off to get rid of this as a possibility, because the longer this drags on and the more that they try and handle this in the courts, the more chances they take that a great deal more information is going to come to light regarding a lot of these things, because as we observed on one of the shows and we talked about privately, that you weren't put in a position where you were told not to disclose what was going on. You weren't given a non-disclosure agreement regarding a lot of this stuff because they had renditioned you. I think the intent was probably to completely disappear you. And, of course, you had the wherewithal to have somebody on the outside who was aware of your situation, your lawyer, namely, that you had contacted immediately when you knew there was a problem, because you refused to back away from wanting to push forward with getting it noted on the record at the very least that war crimes were happening, in your vicinity, among your unit, where that you were witnessing things that you knew were absolutely against international law, the U.S. Code of Military Justice, et cetera, et cetera. So they do ask an interesting question, like, why is it you think that they haven't, and this is more an opinion of yours, I guess, but why is it that you think they haven't simply offered you a payoff to sort of shut you up and say, listen, let's have you sign that non-disclosure now, and we'll sort of close the wound and pay you off?
Well, I think the nature of my case is this. Okay, my case is classified as a case of first impressions. All right, legally, that's the term, first impressions. Never in the history of the United States have they ever had a situation like mine, okay, where, first of all, war crimes were committed, and then they had an intelligence operative in a situation of saying, okay, look, I'm treating these people, which I was. I had to treat these people, document everything that had happened in terms of torture, and then turn right around and say, okay, look, we either knock this stuff off or I'm going to file criminal charges. And something I did not mention to you last time, okay, on your show, is that fortunately, besides having the wherewithal to contact my lawyer, and my lawyer contacted Stan McChrystal, okay, General McChrystal, all right, who basically said, look, no more Pat Tillmans, okay, we don't need any more headaches like that, okay, just make sure this guy is breathing, okay, warm and breathing when he leaves Iraq, all right. I don't want any more dead bodies, okay. We don't need the fallout, but also and this is something that just this week, it has actually come out and been authorized for me to talk about publicly, is that I had a family member who was in the command at Abu Ghraib. All right, and my family member had informed me exactly what the fallout was, what to expect from the command, and it came down to something like this. Okay, and it's hard to believe that there could be people this immature, this self-centered, okay, and this short-sighted, okay, that we could place into a situation which history dictates, okay, and to give them the kind of responsibility which we gave the command. This was the largest intelligence command ever assembled after World War II. My command, and my cousin actually stated. He said, "Greg," he said, "it's just this simple." He said, "What you had to say, okay." They knew they were committing war crimes. They knew that. There was no question about it. Right. They knew that they were hiding and ghosting detainees. They were assisting Colonel Pappas in doing exactly that. The thing was, is they weren't going to sit still while some relatively junior member of their command said, no, this is against the Geneva Conventions, it's against U.S. military law, and we are not going to do it because we are going to end up on our ears when the population of Iraq reacts to the fact that their children and their loved ones are being murdered and tortured by us, doing un-American things. Americans don't torture. It's not in our psyche. It's not in our culture. We don't act like third world thugs, all right? But there we were doing it. And so my cousin actually warned me. He said, here they come. They're on their way to get you. You better contact your legal counsel because they are going to get you out of here whether you want to be or not. They're going to strap you to a stretcher, and that's the last we're going to see of you. And hopefully you have the kind of protection that communications provides, okay, and affords you, which is contact your legal lawyer, your attorney, which I did, Kevin Healy in California, and he contacted General Tom Ayers, who was the adjutant general of the California National Guard. General Ayers, listened about 5 minutes to the story and said, okay, Kevin Healy, get on a plane, go to Baghdad, and he would contact General Stan McChrystal, commander of Southwest Asia, and that's what actually got me out, kept me from being thrown out the back of the medevac plane that I was on. Okay, I was strapped to a stretcher, of course.
Right, because otherwise you probably would have been the victim of misadventure, in some way or other. And this is awfully relevant. And I kind of knew that there was something related to a family member of yours about warning you, but I never mentioned it before because it was sort of an offhanded thing, and I wasn't sure if we could disclose that. So.
Right.
But the thing is, this is you had some sort of warning. Had you not, we wouldn't be having this conversation, I fear. Right. And relatively speaking, just for everybody's clarification here, I mean, you were just a sergeant at the time, right?
That's correct.
So, you're talking about all of these people that are over you, rank and file all together, that were essentially involved in a conspiracy to do something that they knew was criminal. You were calling them out on it, but you had just enough wherewithal to put this together into reports that would have, had they been released and sent through the proper channels, would have caused an earthquake of problems among the military brass, and would have shook the entire situation at the time that we were quite engaged in Iraq. So, and this, of course, coming out publicly at that time would have been even worse than it is nowadays, because the hostilities were just, I don't know how to describe it, but there was a whole lot more live action going on at that time, and the blowback, as it were, would have been a hell of a lot worse. than just public opinion being what it is, and the CIA report coming out, or the summary of the report anyway, coming out without the entire details. And they still haven't released those wonderful details, notice, and the thing is, I think that your case would actually lead to this stuff. Now, it is amazing to me that you were in the proximity of so many of these events. And there's probably more than one of you that could tell a story out there, but only one of you that was ever renditioned, for basically standing up and trying to do the right thing here. That's not to say that there hasn't been other individuals in the intelligence community who have been assassinated or killed by misadventure and whatever else. But all of this stuff, the reason why this is still relevant as far as I'm concerned, because we're not just talking about your case or the conduct of warfare or simply, pointing out the violations of human rights, throughout this time of conflict and all that. This is not an academic exercise because this stuff continues to affect things as they evolve. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try and play you a couple of clips of things and sort of get your thoughts about things that are going on, currently. Because we've been confronted by, changing events, the changing landscape in the Middle East, most recently, by the ISIS thing continuing to evolve or unfold, as it were, in the public mind. And I guess I'll start with that little clip. So if you just bear with me, each one of these is pretty short, so it won't be a long time. But let's see if you can hear it well and if we can just get your thoughts on what's going on.
Okay.
One of the two Japanese hostages being held by ISIS has reportedly been killed, while the other appeared in a new video with a new set of demands from the militant group. The death of Haruna Yukawa was reported by the Site Terrorism Monitoring Service Saturday morning. According to Site, the other hostage, Kenji Goto, appeared in a new ISIS video demanding the release of Sajida al-Rashawi from a prison in Jordan. Al-Rashawi is a female suicide bomber who was arrested in Jordan in 2005 after she failed to detonate her device. Yukawa and Goto both appeared in an ISIS video on Tuesday. At the time, the group gave the Japanese government 72 hours to pay a $200 million ransom. That deadline passed Friday with no payment and no word from ISIS. Saturday's video, which Site says was sent to Goto's mother and the Japanese government, appears to be their response.
Well, now, interesting to me in a lot of ways right there, because this is just the latest in a string of the ISIS the ISIS threats, the beheadings, the public execution and exposition, and a lot of people have had many things to say about the videos. But see, I find a problem with this because the tactical reality involved here and holding people for ransom, this seems to not be part of the agenda of this guy who, like I said, was somebody that you were very familiar with. This would not be the way that that they would be behaving, it seems to me, and it seems really incongruous with the reality of the goals of ISIS and their leadership. What do you think about the journalists and the beheadings and the public exposition of this stuff?
Okay, what I do know of the let me see, what was it? The Haruna Yukawa and then Kenji Goto. Okay, I believe those were the two Japanese that were in ISIS custody. I believe Yukawa was the fellow who was just recently decapitated. I believe Goto is still alive, and all I can say is, after dealing with the brains of ISIS, okay, which was Baghdadi, they're nobody's fooled. Okay, they know how to play the media. They monitor the media, and this goes back to the initial impact of some poor lost soul who was trying to help the situation by the name of Nick Berg. Okay, that goes back a few years, and Nick Berg actually was the first to have his head cut off on the internet. Okay, and that shock value was really noted. Okay, and that's what we have here. The shock value is such that it actually catches the command and attention of nations. In this case, Japan. All right, Japan had just gotten through. Shinzo Abe, the prime minister of Japan, had just gotten through offering, what was it, $200 million to help fight terrorism, because the Japanese had just had a serious case of, in fact, it was the only case where chemical warfare was used, sarin gas, and it was used in the subways. It was a very odd cult that was operating, domestic cult that was operating in Japan. And so, the Japanese are no strangers to domestic terrorism, but the last thing they wanted to see was terrorism starting up in the Middle East, where they're incredibly dependent on oil. Okay, oil and money are always at the basis of all of this. Okay, so what I understand is that this is just very classic ISIS and ISIS tactics. We're going to see more of it, and the Japanese will be reconsidering their position now in the Middle East as a result. And like I said, ISIS is nobody's fool. And also, interestingly enough, remember who pays ISIS to operate. Okay, you don't do that. ISIS doesn't operate in a vacuum. The Q or Al Qaeda does not operate in a vacuum. It takes its orders from select, well-financed governments. All right. In the case of Al Qaeda, you can, as I've always said, I've never deflected any of this at all. They take their orders from theoretically Saudi Arabia, but realistically, in a false flag motive, they take their orders from Israel. Israel is responsible for Al Qaeda, and the U.S. The U.S. is the Frankensteinian monster behind Al Qaeda. All right, and then that's ISIS. Mm-hmm. ISIS, they get paid $1 million a day to carry on like they're carrying on by Prince Bandar. Remember, I think all your listeners remember Bandar Bush, especially those folks in Florida. Remember the name Bush? How can you forget it? Okay, he just emptied the state workers' pension fund. All right, and also was responsible for squeezing his brother into the presidency. Okay, so Prince Bandar Bush, or Bandar, is responsible for funding ISIS, and he's done it through his chief of intelligence, Ben al-Turki. All right, that's what's going on. That's how it's happening. And so these people don't operate in a vacuum. They know, and they know exactly what they're doing, and they have the money to do it, and they have analysts that study the psychological effects of all their actions. They know that ISIS knows it's terrorizing everybody. Okay, they know everybody's scared to death of them.
Now, what's really bizarre to me, though, is, like I said, the demand for ransom. I mean, is that just like a distraction, or is it, or is this, legitimately the ISIS construct acting? Because
no.
Now they're putting.
Symbolic. It's all symbolic. Okay.
Right.
As I said, that amount was exactly the amount that Shinzo Abe had allocated to fight terrorism. All right, was $200 million. Period. Okay, that's why they chose that amount. That's what that was a political statement.
Well, and I'll tell you something else. I mean, of course, Saudi Arabia comes up in this conversation. Israel comes up in this conversation. Now, with the recent regime change that seems to be happening, in parts of the world, let's play a clip on that really quickly and see what you think about that in regards to this, because there is a change going on. So let's see if this works for me. Hopefully it does.
A complicated landscape on the Arabian Peninsula becomes even more complex as Saudi Arabia laid to rest its king and named his brother Salman as successor. At the White House Friday, officials expressed hope the Saudis would continue to work with the U.S. to prevent extremists from gaining a foothold in Yemen and using the country to launch terrorist attacks around the world.
It's given their shared border. Saudi Arabia is particularly concerned about the activities of extremists in Yemen.
The landscape has been plunged into further uncertainty following the collapse of Yemen's U.S.-backed government. Yemen has been an important part of the U.S. fight against al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, which claimed responsibility for the Paris attacks this month. The previous leadership allowed the U.S. to carry out drone strikes at AQAP targets in the country. Now, the future of those and other counterterrorism operations is unclear.
Okay. Now, this is the party line. This is the party line, is that, this is going to change things. Of course, the Yemeni government has fallen. Everybody is still talking about, al-Zawahiri and all that, and of course, the former leader of what they called al-Qaeda in Iraq, and now they put it all under the umbrella of AQAP, as it were, which is, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. But, with the changing of the guard there in Saudi Arabia, are we really looking at something that isn't significant, or does this seem like this is actually going to change the game regarding how this is being played? Because, as you stated, through the surrogate country, as it were, that's acting on behalf of what I think are U.S. intelligence interests, the Saudis have definitely been the paymasters for a lot of this stuff. And of course, we can never discount, Israel propping up their own agitation, as it were, and keeping the imminent threat alive, in the Middle East, as always, because this way there's justification for a lot of things, and of course that's a deep, deep rabbit hole. But how do you think the changing of the guard in Saudi Arabia and the fall of Yemen is going to change this landscape, or is it just going to continue on with just a hiccup?
I think it's just a minor speed bump, to be quite honest. From what I remember of ISIS and its relationship with Saudi Arabia, let's face it, ISIS would not be a problem if it wasn't for Saudi Arabia. Okay, in all areas of Iraq now that ISIS controls, they have brought in Saudi Salafist judges. Okay, judges that are Sharia approved judges, Sharia law, Muslim law, or Islamic law approved judges. Okay, to administer in the Salafist style of Islamic law, okay, and that happens to be in Iraq, okay. So obviously, as long as Saudi Arabia is and the ruling Saud family is in charge, nothing's going to change. I was just looking at something. What was it earlier today, where some poor guy who what was it? He tweeted something about the government. He is getting now 20 lashes a week, and he's in prison for 10 years. Okay, Raif Badawi is his name, and this is an international cause celeb. But the Saudis obviously aren't backing down. Their control of their own people is ironclad. All right, and guess who is supporting them entirely? We have a president that had virtually the heir apparent, Prince Bandar, at his ranch, and like they were the best of buddies, and they call him Prince Bandar Bush. It doesn't get any closer than that. All right, with our relationship with Saudi Arabia, and George H.W. Bush had a business. His main business partner was a Bin Laden. Okay,
no,
it doesn't get any more connected than that at the hip.
Absolutely, yeah. And I find it fascinating that the mainstream never seems to discuss the Wahhabist sect of Islam, because they spend a lot of time, the Shiite and the Muslim, the Shiite and the Sunni, as it were, or the Shia and the Sunni, sects are generally at each other's throat, and this is a historical reality. This is something that will never end, pretty much, for as long as there are enough of them to perpetuate the battles, as it were. This is a historical thing that's gone on, but the Wahhabists, which is, really got a serious homeland when it comes to Saudi Arabia, right? These are the people that really, even a long time ago, long before we were introduced to these ideas about Sharia law and those that wish to see just about everything in the world destroyed that is not Islamic and all of that, these people believed that long before 9/11 happened and we were introduced to these ideas. I personally talked to some of these guys who could speak English and would essentially tell me that was the reality, that, the rest of the world was pretty much unclean. And this is the mindset which allows them to participate in this stuff, seemingly in a covert fashion. But it's really kind of out there in plain sight at this point. And meanwhile, who are our partners regarding all this stuff every time we go over there? Well, leaving Israel out of the discussion just for a moment, Saudi Arabia is always the people that, we're always coming out of Riyadh to go Desert Storm. We were flying out of Riyadh when we weren't coming out of Germany. You know what I mean? And this is...
Oh, yeah.
These were our partners always, and they have been for a very long time. And people have claimed it's, merely over the oil, but there's a whole lot more going on here because, as you're pointing out, the business interests do sort of interlock with, what I consider to be the middle management of our elites over here, namely the Bushes. When it came to putting out the sickly bin Laden as the figurehead of terrorism, post 9/11. It seems as though that was the sacrificial lamb, a guy who wasn't going to live very much longer anyway, who had already been co-opted by the CIA, supported, when he was part of the Mujahideen. This is exactly more of the same story. So, but I'm wondering if there's going to be any sort of a change, regarding this, or is it just, it's all in the family, so it doesn't really matter which member is, ostensibly at the head of it. You figure, the intelligence agencies are still going to continue on?
There's going to be no change. 1492, remember that date, okay? That was the date that Christopher Columbus sailed, from Spain, sailed over to the New World, all right? He actually, the first landfall he made was a little place called San Salvador. It's in the Bahamas, all right? So, yeah, and all your listeners are probably thinking, oh, what does this have to do with anything? Well, Christopher Columbus was informed by Queen Isabella that because he was a Jew, okay, she didn't say Hebrew brother or anything like that. It was he was a Jew, all right, that he was to be out of Dodge, okay, Port of Spain there. He was to be out of Dodge by 10:52. He was to sail, that night at the high tide, all right. He was to be out of Spain because a Spanish pogrom was going to happen, all right. In other words, all the Jews in Spain were going to be kicked out or killed, either one. They had their choice. So that implemented something called the Don May. All right, it's like a diaspora that nobody talks about, the Don May. All right, and virtually all the Hebrews that were in Spain, they went to two places, either Saudi Arabia, and it wasn't Saudi Arabia then, it was just Arabia, all right, or they went to Turkey, okay, the Levant area, all right, and what was that? If you think that's not relevant, 2 years ago, the Turk government just had a purge of all Don May Hebrew Turk officers that were in the Turkish military, all right, because they found that they were operating like a separate form of command, like a command within a command. And guess what happened with the Don May Hebrews that washed up on Arabian Peninsula shores? They became part of the society. They became the money changers. They're part of that society. afraid to break it to anybody that doesn't like the sound of that, but Bin Laden, guess what? Oy vey, all right, he was a lot closer to Tel Aviv and the Knesset than anybody would like to think, all right? And that's why everybody in the intelligence business says nothing could have changed because Al-Qaeda is being run through a false flag operation, being run by Israel, all right? And hence they are our proxy. We paid for Al-Qaeda to be set up. Bin Laden, who knows what Bin Laden really knew and what he didn't know. But it's like saying, what did Hussein, Saddam Hussein know and what didn't he know? Okay, they guaranteed they knew a lot more than what they let on to our media.
Of course.
But the thing is that the United States was responsible for the structure, the building, the compartmentalization, the financing, the logistics, the tactics, the training, the education, the transportation of Al-Qaeda for a reason. And what better group could we ask for if we wanted to have a nonstop, ongoing state of emergency, starting with Tanzania, all right, starting with Kenya, and then moving into the big one, 9/11, all right? And as a result, we have had, we've seen our entire country has completely dismantled its system of human rights, its separation of country and state, of civilian populace and state, all right? I mean, you, just pick up your phone and you want to get close to your government, just pick up your phone, okay? Guaranteed. You'll be much closer to your government than you really want to be. All right?
They're already in your back pocket because of the taxation system, and they're already in your front pocket because that's where you keep your cell phone. So there you go. No escape at this point for those that wish to control the populace.
The Saudis are going to continue chopping people's heads off or legs off for jaywalking, chopping people's heads off for having a difference of opinion. They're going to be, flogging people for twittering. I mean, for the foreseeable future, King Solomon. Gee, I'm suspicious of that name, by the way, that last name.
That killed me too. I really wondered how that got past everybody without even a comment. Pretty much, isn't that amazing? And doesn't that sound, somewhat familiar to people? Solomon's Temple being the home of the poor knights and all of that kind of good stuff, and we could go into all that deep rabbit hole too. But
Ibn Saud, considered the father of Saudi Arabia. He was the money changer. Okay, the treasury of Arabia was in a little tiny chest. Okay, that he basically kept under his sleeping platform, or under his camel, as you will, all right? And so that just falls right in with the money-changing practices of the Don May. Everybody kind of rolls their eyes when I show how history repeats itself. But I did this for 30 years. I was an intelligence analyst for 30 years and an intelligence operative for about 10 years of that period of time. And I do know exactly what drives these countries and how they think, all right? And I do know what drives our intelligence services. And I'm very seldom wrong, as the 500 pounds of documentation in my case shows, that everything is substantiated. There's nothing new. We're not seeing anything new here, okay? This is not the first time. It's always been in an uproar, but hey, they have something that we want, okay? They have something that we need, all right? They have something that the world needs, that Japan needs. Do you think Japan's going to be all upset about having these two citizens of theirs be decapitated on the internet? No. Yeah, they're going to be upset for about a week, and then, yeah, they're going to be about as upset as George Bush was, okay, when 9/11 hit, and all of a sudden he found his popularity ratings, through the roof, to get everybody to wound up, to give up all their civil rights, to dismantle basically the Constitution of the United States. As I said, hey, on your show, what was the first thing that Alberto Gonzalez said, okay, the Attorney General, after John Ashcroft said, about the Constitution of the United States? Oh, well, yeah. He was kind of bothered by this. He said, yeah, it's just a quaint document that has no relevance to the legal system in America today. A quaint document?
Yeah.
And this is the Attorney General speaking? I mean, that gives you an idea of the priority that the Bush administration and Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, had concerning our relationships with these countries that are continuing to keep the world stirred up right now.
Right, and it's equivalent to saying that the heart is a relatively, innocuous organ that is not really relatively important to human life, essentially.
Well, unless you're interrogating somebody, and then it's organ failure. As I was informed, that's okay. That's okay.
That's right. I forgot. Sorry. We did change the definition, didn't we? Okay. So the last thing that I'm going to run by you, just for your brief analysis, and I hope you don't mind this, but I got to be honest with you. I smell a rat from second number one when this story hit, and it's a little bit of an older clip, but we haven't gotten a chance to discuss it on my show. I'm seeing an evolution of a cover story and the opportunistic utilization of what may be a real event that that's being used to sort of shake yet another population in Europe, based under the same guise, the almighty great boogeyman of terrorism, because we don't any longer have the giant communist Iron Curtain to sort of threaten people with. This is a much more fluid thing. This is something that can emerge in any society anywhere. And so we're gonna take it to the BBC and take a look at the news story that sort of brought all of this stuff out and is now bringing all of these other older situations back to the forefront. So just bear with me. This will be the last clip I play. I promise you. All right. Let's see where we go. Okay.
I think we answered Bill's support.
Yeah, we certainly did. Okay.
Masked and heavily armed, two men entered the building in the centre of the French capital late this morning and began firing. By the time they'd stopped, at least 12 people were dead. Many others were seriously injured. The police were quickly on the scene, only to come under attack themselves. Images posted on social media capture the drama. Eyewitnesses have been describing what they saw.
J'ai une voisine qui m'a téléphoné pour me signaler qu'il y avait des hommes armés dans
A neighbour called to warn me that there were armed men in the building and that we had to shut all the doors. And several minutes later there were several shots heard in the building from automatic weapons, firing in all directions. It was really upsetting. You'd think it was a war zone.
Charlie Hebdo, a satirical magazine, has been attacked before. Just over 3 years ago, its premises were firebombed after it published a caricature of the Prophet Muhammad. Shortly after this morning's attack, the French president came to issue a message of defiance on behalf of his nation.
This is an act of an exceptional barbarism that has just happened here in Paris against a newspaper. A newspaper means free speech against journalists who have always endeavored to show that in France you can operate to defend their ideas.
The gunman escaped in a stolen car. They're now being pursued by the police across Paris. John Brain, BBC News.
And what is relative there, as far as I'm concerned, and of course this is the initial reports that came out. I didn't play the later stuff because it's now gotten extremely convoluted. Regarding what actually went down, we've of course seen the capture and the killing of the alleged perpetrators here. They were supposedly coordinated. There's others that are being sought after. This has been turned into a very large sort of situation. One of the places being attacked was the kosher deli, of course, along with the satirical magazine, which nobody really heard of outside of the times it's been attacked, throughout the rest of the world. But the Charlie Hebdo attacks and what they mean really for Europe during this particular time, I think that the story has been evolved in the media in order to produce a really sort of textured idea of what terrorism can do on a local level, to cause the public to once again acquiesce more and more to the greater control system, because now they're talking about needing to put into place programs in order to trace at least 3,000 other threats that may be on the streets in France alone. But this to me, it stinks, because it just does not seem to me like the initial event might have been organic, but I think this buildup that's happened ever after seems to be just the media feeding the frenzy, as it were, and sort of the piranha being consumed by the whale, as it seems to me. I don't know how you took it or what it is you see regarding this situation, because I really haven't discussed it with you or anything, but I figured you might have something to say about it.
Well, okay. As they say in the intelligence business, especially human intelligence, there are no coincidences, all right? Period. They just don't happen. Things don't happen in a vacuum. And the first thing that came to mind was, when I heard that, was, okay, before I react, because my phone immediately started ringing. Okay, what did I think? All right, now I did some checking, and sure enough, okay, very interesting. And of course, as I always say, in these situations, if you listen very carefully, you will hear in the background, you'll hear the term, the Hebrew term, oing, 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 and that's what I heard here. Okay, I did some checking, and I found out, yes, France had voted for the construction and support of a free Palestinian state not too long ago, and I thought, Israel was in a fury over that. Okay. It's called retaliation. This whole thing smelled like a false flag operation, and I almost set my watch with it, my stopwatch with it. I said, okay, how long is it going to be before the Al Qaeda connection shows up? And sure enough, what did it take? 8 hours, maybe, after the initial reporting, before the connection with Al Qaeda happened. All right.
Before the sun set, I basically saw the initial reports when the sun was rising, and before the sun set, we had the AQAP discussion, connecting it back to Anwar al-Awlaki, bringing up the underwear bomber. Remember that guy? Who was supposedly trying to light his underwear on fire on an airplane. Gee, I'm surprised we didn't also dig out of the mothballs the Richard Reed case, the shoe bomber. All of these things suddenly were connected to one another. And this is why I often slip and say Al-Qaeda, excuse me. because I see them being utilized as, the great boogeyman again. This is the deal, is that, they're basically put out there to make a point. And I think, there is some relative reason to take a look at the idea that, France, when just beginning to step forward and talk about, the Palestinian state getting recognition, interesting that this attack that was supposedly 3 years in the making, and let's get something clear. It doesn't take 3 years to plan what went on there. The base actual events. This is something that could have been done on the fly, no problem. They talked about, how they had these guys on the radar, allegedly, and they were watching them and following them and decided they didn't need to anymore. As usual, the concept of now let's hold up the air quotes, a failure of intelligence once again, in order to track, people that should have been deemed dangerous by the intelligence communities. And I also do take special note of the wonderful relationship between United States intelligence assets and the French intelligence assets. So that there was an incestuous kind of deal going on there. And ever after, it does seem that always lurking in the shadow, there is usually somebody connected to the Israeli intelligence complex, as it were, usually involved in these operations discussions, vetting of information, exchange of information, et cetera, et cetera. So there always seems to be, the same swimmers in the same deep end of the pool, as it were.
And another issue that I saw also, I didn't realize this until I did some checking and got some input from my sources over there, where there is a very strong right-wing group in France that is intent on removing Muslims from French soil. Period. Okay, they are intent on it, and they needed, of course, another. Like George W. Bush needed a Pearl Harbor to survive politically. Okay, and he of course went to Cheney and got 9/11, and so this group that is very gaining enormous strength within the last 5 days, okay, has now pretty much has their way to remove the Muslim voting bloc in France from any type of serious politics. All right, so that's what I also saw. But there it was. Okay. On tap, Johnny on the spot, Al Qaeda showing up when they're needed. All right. Now it's awful quiet here. Are you still there, Chuck?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay. I worry because NSA monitors everything so closely that I say.
Well,
okay.
We are down to the last 20 minutes though, just so you know. And I do want to kind of wrap this up because I kind of lost track of time a little bit because I wanted to get into one last thing with you before we're done tonight. No. But please continue because Johnny on the spot, okay. Al Qaeda arrives and does exactly what's needed to keep the population on the ready to support the idea of removing the Muslims from the equation. Go ahead.
Now, the other issue is, and I didn't realize this, was virtually all the four, there was 3 men and a woman involved in the Charlie Hebdo massacre, and then it was a Muslim at the kosher deli. Now, I didn't realize they were all Algerian. And that might not mean anything to somebody who's not in the business, but if you remember, France had quite a history in Algeria, all right, dealing with Algerian resistance, freedom fighters, and so forth. Well, the leader of the Free Algeria Front, okay, was a man named Ben Barka, all right, the Ben Barka story, okay, and some of your elderly or middle-aged folks listening probably remember the name Ben Barka in Algeria and France. Well, Ben Barka came at an invitation, okay, came from fighting the heavy-handed Algerian government that was also being backed up by France at the time. Funny, this thing happened in France. And so he was lured from Algeria, Ben Barka was, to a little cafe not too far from where Charlie Hebdo is currently now, okay, where this happened. And guess who was waiting for him? All right. The Algerian, general who had been tracking him, and a bunch of the heavy thugs, they grabbed Mr. Ben Barka, and he was never seen again. They think he was just tortured to death in that cafe, dismembered, and the parts were carried out in baggies. All right? So guess who arranged, one guess, your listeners only get one guess, guess who arranged that to have Ben Barka come to Paris and be set up like that? Well, okay, your time's up. It was Israel. Israelis set up Ben Barka, from Algeria to be taken down by the Algerian general and Bouteflika, and of course the intelligence services of Algeria and the French services. But it was Israel who orchestrated the whole thing. I mean, that was there was so much fallout over that. But I wouldn't be surprised if that was, given the fact that people that are in a cellular organization like Al Qaeda, they probably wouldn't know what the reason was why they were doing in order to do what they were told to do. That's what makes intelligence services work is cellularization, compartmentalization. So they didn't know. It's like the hijackers. They probably didn't, that took over the planes that crashed them into the World Trade Center, 9/11. They probably didn't know what they were going to do. I really do think that, but that's how these organizations are set up. Whether Johnny on the spot, they can be set up for false flag operations, and you can tell people that have strong nationalist feelings that are in these organizations to go do something because this is what happened way back when, and now it's payback time. And so I was really, really not too surprised. I was surprised to see Algerians of all. It's like seeing Saudi Arabians tied up in the 9/11 hijackings. Okay? Right. And here's Algerians. Okay. So obviously there was a lot more to this story. And when I found out that France had voted to support an independent Palestinian state, that did it right there. So false flag operations, my take on it.
And of course there is the there is the always organic and ever present problem with French colonialism having all sorts of backlash to it. So this makes for very convenient recruiting under the guise of the injustices that were committed by under French colonialism. I mean, all you have to do is look back at Laos and Vietnam, Algeria. Remember the French were in Vietnam and basically left under the same conditions that we did, essentially, but they did it before us. Take a look at something called Bien Bien Phu, and you'll find out exactly what happened to the French when they were attempting to do that. But they have been all over the planet. Remember, they were one of the larger of the European empires at one point. Everything from, like I say, Haiti to Vietnam. They were all over the place doing this kind of stuff. So it does make the recruiting grounds rather fertile, just based on those sort of nationalist movements. And this is always part of the game. But ever present also is Israel's meddling in in these kind of concerns where you have these colonial issues that go on, and this is what happens, right?
Now, interesting point, because I know we're running out of time here, but for your listeners, okay, everybody out there remembers the ticking time bomb, okay? Anybody who's watched an episode of 24 with Kiefer Sutherland, okay, Jack Bauer, I think that's what his highly dramatic agent name was, but Jack Bauer was always looking for the ticking time bomb, okay? Well, just so as everybody understands about ticking time bombs on your show, they don't exist, okay? They do not exist. They never did exist, all right? And so now is good time to point this out to the American people. Okay, it was the justification for all our torture programs. Okay, copper green, which is alive and well in 70 countries now. It's alive and well, and people are being tortured in our names and disappeared and assassinated horribly in our names. Okay, but Algeria, okay, the French Foreign Legion and the French intelligence, what is it, the Dossier Gendarme Extraordinaire, I think I said it correctly, is the French Bureau for Fighting Terrorism, okay? They were doing very bad things, okay, in terms of torture and interrogation, enhanced interrogation. I just love that euphemism, okay, especially when I was looking at a kid being set on fire, okay, when he was being interrogated, all right? They call that enhanced. Yeah, that was really enhanced. But anyway, that's where that term came from, when all these hideous things that the French were doing to the Algerians in terms of interrogation, and they developed that term, ticking time bomb. There never was a ticking time bomb, but they said that was their justification just in case there was a ticking time bomb. Like Jack, yeah, and I noticed, even like the U.S. Attorney's Office said, that's why they were justified in writing torture memos, because Jack Bauer, they wanted to do things like Jack Bauer did in 24. They actually said this, and it's on the record. They wanted to do like Jack Bauer does on 24. Okay, so they said, yes, there is a ticking time bomb scenario. There ain't no time bomb, folks. There never was. It came from Algeria and the Legionnaires and the French intelligence services destroying people and creating an insurgency that couldn't be stopped. Algeria threw the French out, okay, and because you can't stop an insurgency once it gets started. And that is when you're in the business, you know that, all right? That's why it's ridiculous to try to stop an insurgency. Okay, we found that out in Iraq. We got handed our hats in Iraq, if anybody doesn't understand that now. And the French got handed their hats or their berets, in Vietnam. Okay, the Viet Minh proved it to them at Dien Bien Phu. All right, so there ain't no ticking time bomb. There's no justification for this bad behavior. Okay, and all it does, it destroys the image of the United States. Look what image we have now compared to what we had before George Bush and his mere group of imbecilic psychopaths, took over. Okay, we had a very good reputation, and Iraqis came to me and said, "Why are you doing this stuff to us? You're Americans. We thought you would not do this. What Hussein did to us. We are going to kill you as a result of what you are doing to us and our children and our loved ones." They told me that. All right. So that's why I filed the charges I did. So keep that in mind, folks, that yes, the Charlie Hebdo situation has an extraordinary history to it and connection to it, and history does repeat itself. It will repeat itself unless people are aware. The thinking people that listen to your show, Chuck, okay, they have to be conscientious, and they have to communicate. They have to pay attention, to things that are being done in their names. But otherwise, hey, we're getting ready to fire up the war engine, and we're going to go right back into Libya, and we're going to go right back into Yemen, all right, and we're probably already back in Iraq, effectively, all right. So unless the people that are paying attention here in the United States say, no, enough of this nonsense, okay, always remember, Iraq made thousands and thousands of millionaires, okay? We don't need any more millionaires made from war profiteering, and that's what all this is about. So anyway, are there any more questions before we close, Chuck?
Well, that's actually all the ones that I extracted from the questions that were sent to me.
Yeah.
Right. I'll check with
the... Yeah. Okay, yeah. I mean, it sounds like they're coming from all over. New York, Florida, yeah. So,
yeah, you'd be
make sure
surprised. You'd be surprised who actually winds up tuning in or catching this later on downstream, because it ends up on YouTube and the archives get picked up. So, live listenership is something that I'm not aware of at the time I'm broadcasting. So who knows who's listening? But glad that everybody did. Somebody made a comment in the chat room. I'm looking at the bottom line of the chat room. That it seems as though you never do leave the industry when it comes to intelligence, and you were exited not really of your own volition is something that that I like to add to that, because I don't think for a minute that you would go through doing what you're doing. And filing the case, and let's just mention that one more time. We didn't even get to discuss American Sniper, which I wanted to get into. Maybe we'll do that on a future program. Because you just saw that movie and happened to have known that guy. But let's see now. I wanted to get the document up actually from your court case and go over that one more time. But I wonder if you want to give people a brief synopsis about what the court case is exactly, and who the named defendants are, because this is this is really the most relevant part of what's going on with you. Is this was your experience? This is what happened to you. Again, the only person that I've ever heard of who was a U.S. intelligence asset, who was renditioned and actually survived. So there's the rarity, and we did cover why you survived a little earlier there. A little bit of luck on your part, really, because you had a family member in a position to give you a warning, and you had the wherewithal to contact your attorney. So these two things contributed to the fact that we're actually able to have this conversation today. And this is still a pending case, in the court. And I think that, in a way, they're kind of dragging their feet regarding this, because, if this all does come out and end up landing on the public record, after a while, some people are going to have to dig through the documentation and take a look at what really happened here. And I think it'll open up many other cans of worms regarding the actions of the of the U.S. Military in Iraq and elsewhere. So, and of course, this would bring to fruition some of these other things that have been proposed, and also bring about a lot more gravitas, as it were, to the cases of crimes, war crimes tribunals, and things like this. That are being discussed now regarding, some of our favorite people like Dick Cheney and George W. Bush, and all of the associated individuals who seem to think that this was a justifiable road to travel regarding gathering intelligence, which, just effectively, by the way, it seems to me as though torture in and of itself is not the way to collect intelligence, regardless of who it is you're dealing with. It often produces unreliable and problematic things that just blow back on you later. At least that's my opinion. So even from a strategic sense, leaving morals out of the equation, we're talking about something that is not effective, is in fact counterintuitive to the gathering of information, and in my opinion. But then again, maybe I'm just, crazy and just have this whole moral idea, and I'm too stuck on that, right?
Well, always remember that that intelligence work is not like Jack Bauer or James Bond, all right? I mean, I got flat feet. I had some pretty high arches before I started the intelligence business, and I've got flat feet now. Flat as pancakes. Okay, now, torture, okay, yes, there was no need for it ever. Okay, and nobody wants to hear this, but the thing is, when you take somebody prisoner, okay, as in detainee or whatever euphemism you want to call it, okay, just so people understand this, it's not like Jack Bauer where you have to pull out a gun and say, "Tell me where the bomb is, or I'm going to blow your kneecaps off," and they're screaming and you're shooting, and it's all nonsense. When you take somebody prisoner, they are terrified. All right, they are terrified. It's not like Hollywood, okay? And here's the deal: is quite often I could not write fast enough and record fast enough to get all that they were telling me, okay? And like I say, Mr. Hardcore, Killer Elite, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Now, this was, of course, pre-gold Rolex watch. Now he wears a gold Rolex, and somebody better teach him how to walk, too, okay? I saw him the other night. I couldn't believe it was the same guy, this big hyper-dramatic walk that he has now.
Right. Now, listen, we're just about out of time, and I want to just say thank you once again, and we will do this again. Frank Gregory Ford, look up the name, look up what it is he's blowing the whistle about, WMDs, torture, all of these odd realities that could be unveiled if his case actually does make it all the way through the system. Absolutely. Regardless of what the opinions are out there of some people, I put a lot of stock into what he's telling us. And thank you for listening to the Ochelli Effect. Everybody have a good night. Stay tuned for Jaded.
At the age of 19 in 1962, she was
See, but I have the files. I read this stuff at the National Archives, and I read these other things. I said to myself, how can that be possible? The brain, pistols and fondle slab of choice, and on computers, internet, professional wrestlers, and not Jesse Ventura style. It doesn't matter where the information comes from as long as it's real. It's hard to get real information because seriously, they just